see.
Guys, are we recording?
I think we're recording.
All right. I'm Alexis, and I go to Virginia Commonwealth University. For those of you tuning in, if anyone's tuning in, I'm a second-year Master of Public Health student, and this is Public Health Ambassador. And I am with my colleagues Courtney and Alyssa. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Go ahead, Alyssa.
I can go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Alyssa. I'm also a second-year Master of Public Health student. I go to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm really excited to get this started.
Yeah, and I am Courtney Blondino. I'm a fourth year PhD student at VCU with Alexis, which is super cool. And my PhD is in epidemiology. Should be graduating in May. Looking forward to it. But super excited to be here with whoever is with us watching this. So yeah, let's get started. Alexis, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So, as you all know, we're reading The Political Determinants of Health. And when Alyssa, Courtney, and I got together to pick the book for the November, December months, there's a lot of great books out there to choose from. And I think in both of our schools, we talk a lot about the social determinants of health and risk and protective factors for different diseases and outcomes. And so when we came across this book on Goodreads, little plug there, we were just definitely intrigued to take it to the next level. We talk about social determinants all the time, and the idea that political determinants could be a factor was something that I know I was very interested in considering, especially given the political climate recently and the changes potentially in that are to come. So, do you guys have anything else that you wanted to add for picking the book?
I mean, just going off of what you said, Alexis, I feel like, right now more than ever, we're becoming super aware of the political determinants and just, politics in general. Of course, it's an election year. And you're right that we've definitely heard a lot about this, about health equity and kind of the social determinants in our coursework, but it's starting to kind of bleed out. And so, we decided to do this book, like in late September or October. And I think since then, I mean, we've only grown more conscious of these things. So there's no better time.
Awesome. Well, let's just kick it off then. So in the first chapter, uh, Mr. Dawes talks about he tells an allegory basically about planting different seeds in trees and how he treats them differently based on how promising they are in producing the fruit and everything that he's looking for, and how that overall impacted whether or not one of the trees was going to be successful in growing and whether the other one was not. What were some of your impressions of that allegory and some takeaways that you guys had from that?
Yeah, I'll take this. I really enjoyed it. I know it was kind of long, but I like that the author spent time kind of talking about every single element that was brought into the story. So it's not just the seeds, but he talked about the fertilizer and the water and what does that mean. And I thought it was a really great comparison to what is actually happening um, to people in society, in American society. And so for me, I think it drew a really understandable and tangible picture for someone to really kind of get a better idea of this. How we've talked about earlier, like people who may not have this type of background in public health may not know all these types of things. So I think this kinds of sets the tone for the rest of the book, making it just easier for people to access, and think about in their brain and how this can actually be happening. Because I know, not all of us are experiencing these types of determinants, right? So um, I thought it was really interesting, long, but very interesting, and how that was developed.
Yeah, it was very comprehensive. He really did not miss any details. And I think it's really helpful to just kind of, the reason that it's so long is because, I mean, we have so much that we need to talk about and think about in terms of like how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was interesting when he talked about how like zip code more than genetic code predicts health status and life expectancy. So like where you work, live, sleep, eat, play, pray, all that kind of stuff. Um, you know, really impacts how fruitful your life is going to be, and how that can be determined by people outside of an individual, you know. So, and it made me think of the study. Courtney, you would know this, and
I
then
was
Alyssa, I
just,
can send it.
yeah, I was just going to say this is a good plug, so go for it.
Yeah, they did a study in Richmond that looked at like the redlining zones, and just how the areas in Richmond that were affected by that, their health outcomes are far worse today than compared to other areas that were, you know, gentrified and, you know, given all the resources. Basically, those areas now in Richmond are still facing a lot of disparities in health and in, you know, access to resources and just all those things. And so, like, when I was reading this, obviously on a national scale, it's so much more, you know, impactful and it's bigger, but just even in our local community, I can easily see where that plays a role. So that was definitely something that, you know, I was reflecting on when reading that part. And I also liked when he talked about the fact that, like, when we think about equitable treatment, like in relation to his allegory, you know, the giving attention to the needs of the seeds in the poor soil doesn't take away from the needs of the seeds in the nutrient soil, so, or nutrient rich soil. So like just to give to someone else isn't going to take away from somebody else. But I think that that's really hard to, you know, digest for a lot of people, and to not feel like have that fear, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, Alexis, that was the quote that I pulled. That was like one of my, that was the one from chapter 1, because I think people think that if someone is going to get a resource that I'm not, you know, like does that mean there's less for me or whatever? But that's not the case, right? I mean, and the sentence right after that, oh dang, it'll take me a minute. The sentence right after that is really great too. Do you have it up, Alexis?
I don't. I only have my little
You
highlights.
just have that one. Dang it. I want to,
Yeah.
I can, I can find it. Maybe I can find it. You guys talk while I find this.
Something that I thought was really interesting is that, like, in the beginning, so for people who like aren't familiar with the allegory, if you haven't read the chapter, it's about a farmer had like 6 seeds and then he planted them all in like different conditions. But from where it starts, there's like nothing different fundamentally about any of the seeds. He just picked like the ones that he liked the best. And so, you know, it's just like interesting to think about how, like, we really, you know, obviously we really could have altered, but I thought it was really interesting that he didn't like talk anything about how, like, the reasoning behind why he chose certain ones to plant or not to plant.
Mm-hmm. I found the sentence, so I'll go back to it. So after that one, right below, it says historically the United States has failed to recognize that achieving health equity requires valuing each group equally and recognizing their contribution. So equity is not necessarily equality, and I think he goes into that, but it also, equity means valuing each group equally and recognizing what each group needs. And some might need more than others, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a reduction of resources for one group. So I thought he summed that up really well.
Any other thoughts on chapter 1?
I wanted to go off of well, this is kind of a transition into chapter 2. Could I do that?
Go for it.
We're making the rules as we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking, Alyssa, as you were saying, what was it that you were saying? We were talking about equity and how different groups are getting different types of treatment, or the seeds, right? So there was no reason behind why one seed potentially would be getting more resources than another, other than, you know, it has the potential to be a more fruitful crop, right? And something that really stuck to me in chapter 2, and we can kind of dig into it depending on, you know, how deep, but going over the policies and how things kind of evolved. And what was really interesting to me was how there was, you know, someone would make one step forward in health equity just for a different administration to come in and take us 10 steps back, right? And it was just, and it's always been that way. I feel like it's happening now. But one thing that really stood out to me was that for however many years, I guess 100. I might have gotten that wrong, but it's like people, health equity advocates were trying to make a play to get, better health care for slaves, for people of color. And they just couldn't get there, right? Like there was so much, I guess, just so many people against moving in that way for whatever reason, politically, their own biases, whatever. But then sailors needed healthcare, right? And they got it. So I thought that that was really interesting. And I thought it paralleled pretty nicely to the story in the beginning about, you know, maybe we don't want to give slaves this care, or freed slaves. That's a better way of approaching it. The freed slaves, the care that they deserve, but sailors need it. And maybe they're going to be better for our economy. So maybe we support them more. Like that's my interpretation of it. But, and you guys can take it from there. But I just thought that was a really interesting play of how, the story aligned with history, and how, pretty well of how that happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, Alyssa, were you gonna go?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. It made me think, like, we pick and choose who's going to be successful, and like those who have or those who are in power have a voice, and kind of vice versa, like, and those who have a voice determine what matters. And in that case, like, sailors having healthcare mattered, but people of color did not. And I just saw throughout that chapter the importance of having advocates, like tireless advocates, that despite like all of the challenges and knockdowns and taking one step forward to take 10 steps back, like they kept showing up tirelessly and contributing their efforts like relentlessly. And even still today, like there's still so much work to be done. And I don't know, just kind of made me stop to think like how we can be discouraged from doing those things. But just over the course of history, like there are prominent people or groups that have really made the difference. And if they would have just given up, like we'd still be even worse off. So.
And I think to both of your points, the importance of kind of politicking like your agenda in a way that makes people want to do it, like as bad as that sounds, like if you're marketing, in America, like it or not, you really have to prioritize the economy and like pushing forward something that you want to do. And so like you can see in the whole chapter that like the plans that were successful were really able to highlight like this would be your loss if you didn't take care of these people, because like you would lose their contribution in the workforce and those types of things. So, as bad as it is, I think that like we can learn something from those past successes and kind of understand why, kind of that economic approach might be the priority for now. And then, we can work around changing it later. But for now, I think that's kind of like where we have to head.
Yeah, there was a part that I highlighted. I mean, this is just one of the many areas, but it was talking about how like John Adams and Ben Franklin, struck a policy that could have been helpful because it would have been too controversial. And I just like thought, I literally made the note, like, how often do we like nix or avoid something because it's going to be too controversial? And like how a controversial issue, it's not just like, what do we want for dinner? Like this is people's lives being affected, and like their rights and their access to like live a healthy life. But it's too controversial, so we can't go there, so it just, yeah, it's just so interesting to see that theme be repeated constantly.
And I think too, just to kind of go off of what you said, Alyssa, and what you're saying, Alexis, is like the idea of being relentless, and perhaps just not getting discouraged, right? Because you try really hard. I mean, who was it? I'm sorry, I'm not, there was someone who was trying to get a policy passed, and it was like 2 years later she'd show up again and try to get it passed, wouldn't happen. 2 years later, show up again. I mean, it was just constant. And I think
Oh,
like,
you're thinking about the Mental Health Act?
yes,
Or
yes, yeah, I think, yeah, I think that was it. And it was just like, it's so like just encouraging to hear that people aren't getting let down. I mean, it won't pass, but they keep going, and they get to a point where they can get something passed. So I think like in this work especially, it's really important to just persevere and keep going in it regardless of the barriers that might be there, controversial or not, right? And it's getting to a point where we can start to see more equity in the healthcare system.
Right. I think, like, to your point, there was even, I can't remember where it was, but near the end of chapter 2, they were talking about how one of the big lessons of the Affordable Care Act was that, like, the administration at the time, like the Obama administration, understood that they had to keep on pushing like this healthcare agenda in order for it to pass, even though like there were other things that were kind of pressing, you know, like the recession happened in 2008, but he kind of still was driving that forward, and kind of how important it is to not lose track of that if it's really like what you're going to prioritize.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a section highlighted that kind of goes off of what you were saying, Alyssa, like, and it might have been the same area, but where he talked about like health policies driven by the political determinants of health in the same way. It may not be the smartest policy that gets implemented, but it may succeed because its creators recognize and successfully manipulate the politics of time. Like, just the fact that like there are so many things that I think there's a lot of policies out there that we look at and we're like, what the heck? Like, why would they, you know, leave out this or not consider this? And I made the comment in there, like when I highlighted that, like, perfection is the enemy of good, you know, I guess like sometimes we really just gotta focus on like taking one step and address fixing it later, but as long as we're getting like closer to the end goal. But it just seems so wild to me still that like we do that with, you know, healthcare. I mean, again, we're all in public health, so that makes sense that we think that way. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was when I was an undergrad, one of my professors compared like the rise of health policy here in America to playing a game of Jenga. So like, you know, you're trying to like build and build, but then like things keep changing as, you know, and you have to kind of adjust for like what you need at the time. And it may not be like, you know, to your point, Alexis, like it has to be what needs to be done at the time, and you'll think about it later.
Courtney, did you have anything you wanted to add?
There was just one part towards the end because you read these things and you're like, okay, what do we do? Right? Like I read all this and I go, what do I need to do? Do I need to go to Washington? Because I'll go. Like I need to, and like we, you know, reading about all these people who've advocated for this, like it puts a fire in my belly to go do it too. So I'm trying, you know, I get to a point where I'm like, all right, then what, you know, like how do we actually go about doing this? And I actually have never had a health policy class. I've done a health systems class but not a health policy class, so I feel like there's so much that I still don't know about this. But anyway, and I don't think this is necessarily a next step, but at the end of chapter 2, the author says, unless we engage in this interdisciplinary research and demonstrate the causal link between the political determinants of health political determinants and health inequities, we will lose ground in the argument that health inequities today are primarily the result of social factors, not political factors, which will leave us with no legal or political remedy to leverage. Right? So like, we're very much operating in social determinants of health. I mean, I think that that's something that we very commonly see. CDC has a page on this, right? Like people are starting to come around and acknowledge social ones. Great. But the fact that we're not addressing a broader, more systemic political determinant of health, then as he's saying, we don't have any legal or political remedy to leverage. So I think it really is figuring out a way to take it beyond the social and hit them at the political. But I think people like me need to take a policy class because I think we have that exposure, right, in public health. But there are policy people that like, I don't know how to speak that language. Like,
Right.
I don't know law. Like, now do I need to get a law degree to make these things happen too? So I think it's just, it makes me excited about future chapters, and hopefully gives me more information about like where we can move next. But I think it's really important to realize that I think we do have to approach this at a larger, bigger level to try to see any type of even minimal movement, you know?
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, have you ever read a bill?
No,
Like,
besides the Bill of Rights in like, you know, elementary school or whatever. I mean, I don't actually, that's a lie. Yes, I have, but
they
they're
make
nuts.
really hard to digest that stuff. and like how you're supposed to like get meaning from it as like an ordinary person with no, I don't have any legal or government experience. So I think, there definitely has to be something in the future that makes kind of these, legislative and other political factors like digestible for people like you and me, and like even people who aren't in grad school studying public health, just so that we can get a sense of like what all needs to be done and how we can do it. Because otherwise, like, you can recognize that these things need to be done, but like it's hard to know where to start.
Absolutely. Oh, well said. Alexis, we had a question, right?
Yes, I was just going to say, should we
Yeah, let's do
address
it.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we had a question submitted this week, and the reader said, Chapter 2 highlights past attempts at healthcare reform and discusses the recipe required to pass legislation. Very on par with our conversation. Do you think we're approaching a similar point in time where healthcare reform can be advanced? Which brave soul is going to take it on?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some obvious setbacks that have occurred in the last 4 years on this in this area. And based on where things look like they're going, it seems like we'll have an administration that might prioritize health equity a bit more. And I haven't, and especially with COVID, right? Like the different narratives that you're getting from both sides of the political aisle are very different, and the approach is very different. And I think, in this book, we're going to talk about politics, right? It's the political determinants of health. People get a little bit nervous about this, but I mean, understanding how divisive our current political system is, I think it's going to be something that needs to be, well, I think we've recognized it. I think that's been acknowledged, but I think compromise has to happen on some level to get movement anywhere. And I mean, I don't know if you guys are watching the news or seeing it. I mean, some of the headlines you see are, is it possible for us to even make decisions together anymore, just because of how divisive it's gotten? But I mean, I'm optimistic. I really hope that with our vaccines coming out, hope, fingers crossed, soon, in the next coming months, that we can get to a place where, well, we can get to a place that's a bit more equitable in regard to potentially, or it could also enlighten us in some of the disparities that are happening there. It's already doing that now, but I think I'm optimistic that we can start to make compromises a bit better, and start moving forward. What that looks like, I don't know.
I would totally agree. I mean, it's a good time now. You know, one thing that you can take out of the past 4 years and that political administration is that people are more politically active now in their everyday lives than they have ever been before. Like voter turnout this past month was at an all-time high. So, I mean, I feel also optimistic that now is the time to kind of start pushing and start kind of dripping this stuff into people's consciousness, and kind of, I think that the factors are all there, and with some luck we could probably get them together into some sort of forward change. So we'll see, I think, as the next couple of months and next year plays out, if the recipe can get put together. But I feel pretty good.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you both said. I'm very, very curious to see how things change. There was a quote in the Washington Post like a while ago. People had been saying like the coronavirus is like the great equalizer and stuff. And I don't know that was really like the best way to put it, but this person had said that the coronavirus is an incredible diagnostic tool. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. And I thought that like now more than ever before, at least maybe I'm just paying more attention to it, but the concept of social determinants of health and like the gaps in care and gaps in resources, and like paying attention to people who whose lives have been flipped upside down to no fault of their own, are now unable to support themselves or care for themselves. I mean, just all these things that have always been present, but just have really been brought to light, both like in the media as well as like, you know, the news and talking about these things and journal articles that are floating around now and people are reading. So like, to me, I feel like I don't know what changes are going to be possible just from a political standpoint, and the fact that like, even though this incoming administration does seem to have a focus and prioritize that, you know, there is always the issue of, you know, Congress and getting things passed and things like that. So I think that that'll definitely present challenges. I don't know if I don't know what'll happen, but I do think that like the conversation is shifting, which is like the first step to anything, and bringing that to light and like putting the bug in people's ears, like you were talking about, Alyssa, and just getting that on the forefront of people's agendas and like things that they prioritize. So I'm also hopeful. I don't know if I could be anything other than that. Otherwise, it'd be really sad. But I do hope that that like is change to come for sure.
Well, cool. Do we have any last thoughts about chapters 1 and 2? All right. Well, Alyssa, I'm pulling up our schedule now. When is our next? Let me see. So we'll be reading chapter 3 next, just chapter 3, because I think it's a bit longer. And questions will be due on November 29th. We'll get together November 30th. And we'll have this posted to you guys very shortly after that. So cool. Book club number 1. I think it went well. And if anyone who watches this, if you guys have comments or questions based off of our discussion here, please comment on Goodreads, send us a message on Instagram if you want to there too. Goodreads is probably best. And we'd be happy to respond to them too. So, thanks everyone, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.